Linda had always been a methodical person, someone who liked to plan, to organize, and to make sure everything was in its proper place. For the past 30 years, her job in accounting had given her a sense of purpose, a sense of control over her finances and her life. Now, as she approached her 50th birthday and began to think about retirement, Linda had imagined her transition into this new chapter of life to be smooth and well-deserved. She had worked hard, saved diligently, and planned every step. But nothing could have prepared her for the complication that came with a simple task, updating her banking information to receive her retirement benefits. It all started the day President Trump announced the changes to the process of identity verification for those receiving government benefits. Linda had never thought twice about her bank details. She had received her paycheck and handled her finances through the same account for years, and it had always been efficient. But when it came time to update her information for her Social Security pension, she quickly realized that the new identity verification procedures were more complicated than anything she had ever encountered. The website she needed to access was overloaded with traffic, and the instructions were vague. She had to provide multiple forms of identification, submit to facial recognition software, and undergo an endless series of security questions. There were passwords, PIN codes, and even fingerprint verifications, all designed to ensure her information was safe. But for Linda, each step felt more like a barrier than a safeguard. She sat in front of her computer, staring at the verification page, feeling a growing sense of frustration. The system asked for one document after another, each more intrusive than the last. What was once a simple update now felt like an invasion of privacy. The thought that this process, designed to protect her, was actually making her feel vulnerable, was unsettling. Linda clicked the Next button, submitting her first form. Then came the confirmation email asking her to verify her identity via a secure link. She followed the instructions, but the page timed out before she could complete the process. "Please try again later," it said, in its cold, automated voice. She stared at the screen, her fingers still hovering over the mouse. What had she done wrong? How many more times would she have to go through this? Over the next few days, Linda continued to try and navigate the labyrinth of verification steps. Each time she thought she had completed one part of the process, another roadblock appeared. The wait times were long, and the more she tried to push through, the more uncertain she became. Every time she received an email with another request for confirmation, her heart sank a little more. It was as though the system was built not to help her, but to test her patience, and her trust. One afternoon, after yet another frustrating round of identity verification attempts, Linda took a deep breath and picked up the phone to call the Social Security Administration. She had already waited on hold for hours in the past, but today, she was desperate for answers. "Thank you for calling the Social Security Administration," the automated voice greeted her. "Your call is important to us. Please hold for the next available representative." The familiar hold music played, and Linda felt the knot in her stomach tighten. The same robotic voice had greeted her during all her previous attempts. The same vague messages. The same promises of assistance that never seemed to materialize. After nearly an hour of waiting, she was connected to a representative who, despite being polite, sounded equally as overwhelmed as Linda. The woman on the other end apologized for the delays and assured Linda that the new system was designed to prevent fraud and identity theft. "I understand that this process is inconvenient," she said, "but it's for your protection." Linda nodded, although she didn't feel protected. In fact, she felt more exposed than ever. "How long will it take for me to receive my pension?" Linda asked, trying to stay calm. "Unfortunately," the representative replied, "due to the changes in the verification process, it could take several weeks to complete. You will receive a notice once your identity has been successfully verified, and then we can process your pension payment." Linda's mind raced as she processed the information. "Several weeks," she repeated. "That's not acceptable. How am I supposed to manage my finances until then? I've been working toward this moment for years, and now it's all delayed." The representative didn't have an answer that satisfied Linda. "I understand your frustration, but these measures are necessary to protect everyone involved," she said, almost apologetically. Please be patient, and we will notify you when the process is complete." When Linda hung up the phone, she felt defeated. The frustration was palpable, and the anxiety over her delayed pension payments was starting to cloud her ability to think clearly. She had always taken pride in being financially independent, having planned for this moment meticulously. Now, the system designed to ensure her security had become the very thing threatening her peace of mind. As she looked out the window, watching the afternoon sun dip below the horizon, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The trust she had once placed in the government and the systems that were supposed to help her now felt fragile. The fear that her personal information was being mishandled or exposed gnawed at her. How many more steps would she have to take before she could feel secure again? The system that was meant to be a safeguard had instead become a source of anxiety, and Linda couldn't help but wonder how many others were out there, struggling just like her, caught in the web of bureaucracy and uncertainty. After a sleepless night spent tossing and turning, Linda couldn't shake the frustration that had been building inside her since her last interaction with the Social Security Administration, SSA. The endless verification hoops, the long wait times, and the lack of concrete answers had left her feeling utterly powerless. What was supposed to be a simple update to her banking information had become an ongoing battle that felt as though it might never end. She started her day as usual, making a pot of coffee and sitting down at her kitchen table, but there was a sense of dread hanging over her. She glanced at the pile of paperwork, the Social Security letters, the bank statements, and the vague instructions on how to proceed with the verification process. Her eyes settled on the email from SSA again, the one that told her her request was still under review. The words "processing delay" were printed in bold, as if the message was mocking her attempts to navigate a system that had become more convoluted by the day. Linda knew she couldn't continue waiting in silence. She had to try again. Picking up the phone, she dialed the familiar number to SSA's helpline, her fingers gripping the phone with a tightness that reflected the anxiety in her chest. The automated voice greeted her once more, and she pressed the numbers as instructed, repeating the same process she had done countless times. "Thank you for calling the Social Security Administration." The robotic voice droned, "Your call is important to us. Please hold for the next available representative." Linda let out a sigh, knowing that the next 30 minutes, or more, would be spent listening to the same hold music. It was always the same. The repetition of the music, the endless waiting, only made her feel more isolated and small. She had been trying to get through for weeks, and each attempt felt like a dead end. The SSA seemed to be growing further away, as though the agency were intentionally pushing her aside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she was connected to a representative. The woman on the other end of the line spoke in a calm, professional tone, but Linda could hear the exhaustion in her voice. It was clear the woman had been answering calls all day, dealing with the same frustrated clients. "Hello, ma'am, how can I assist you today?" The representative asked. Linda took a deep breath, her voice controlled but tinged with frustration. "I'm calling to follow up on my request to update my banking information for my retirement benefits. I've completed all the verification steps, but I've been waiting for over a month, and I still haven't received any confirmation." The representative paused for a moment. The sound of typing in the background filling the silence. "I'm sorry for the delay, ma'am. It seems that there has been a backlog due to the recent changes in the verification system. We're processing applications as quickly as possible, but there are many others in line before yours." Linda could feel her patience thinning. She had heard this before, and it was always the same excuse. The backlog. The delays. The endless waiting. "I understand that, but this is affecting my ability to plan my retirement," she said, trying to keep her tone even. "I need to know when I can expect my payments to be processed." The representative typed some more, her voice coming back on the line after a brief pause. "Unfortunately, I cannot provide an exact date for when your request will be processed. It could be another few weeks, depending on the volume of cases we are handling." Linda's stomach churned. "A few weeks?" she repeated incredulously. "I've already been waiting over a month. How long is this going to go on? I'm on a fixed income, and I can't afford to keep waiting like this." There was a long silence before the representative spoke again. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but there is nothing more I can do to expedite your request. I recommend checking your account status regularly for any updates. Linda's blood boiled. The woman's voice was polite, but the lack of any real solution left her feeling helpless. She had done everything right, followed all the steps, provided all the necessary documents, but the system that was supposed to support her had failed her. Thank you for your time, Linda said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. She hung up the phone, her hand shaking slightly. She stared at the phone in her hand, feeling the weight of her situation settle in once again. The walls of bureaucracy had closed in on her, and she couldn't find a way out. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Linda couldn't focus on much else. She felt like she was walking through a fog, disconnected from the world around her. She kept thinking about the money she was waiting for, the future she had planned for, and how it all seemed to be slipping away. That evening, she sat in front of the television, but the show on the screen felt distant and unimportant. Her mind kept wandering back to the verification process, the endless forms, the confusing steps, the constant feeling that she was being bounced from one department to the next. She felt like a cog in a machine that had forgotten its purpose. It wasn't just the money, though that was certainly a significant concern. It was the fact that Linda had always trusted the system, trusted that the country she had worked for and paid into for so long would have her back when she needed it most. But now, all she could see were walls, barriers put up by a broken system that didn't care. As she sat there, Linda's thoughts turned dark. What if the system never worked for her again? What if she was left waiting forever, unable to access the benefits she had worked so hard for? It felt like everything she had worked for, the stability, the independence, was crumbling, and for the first time in years, Linda wondered if she had been wrong to trust so blindly in the very system she had believed would take care of her. Weeks had passed since Linda's last call with the Social Security Administration. The endless rounds of verification requests had become a blur, each one more complicated and drawn out than the last. What she thought would be a simple update to her banking information had spiraled into an exhausting cycle of waiting, frustration, and uncertainty. Linda had hoped the process would be quick, but now, as the days turned into weeks, she began to feel the weight of her financial situation more and more. Her bank account, once a symbol of her hard work and independence, was now a constant source of anxiety. Linda had always been cautious with her money, budgeting meticulously and saving whenever she could. But as she sat at the kitchen table, looking at the bills scattered before her, she realized that her savings were quickly running dry. The checks from the Social Security Administration still hadn't come through, and her savings account, once a cushion of security, was nearing empty. The electricity bill was due, and the warning notice from the gas company was the latest in a series of overdue payments. Linda had always been good about paying her bills on time, but now, she was falling behind. The thought of being cut off from utilities was a terrifying one, and yet, it felt all too real. She picked up the phone again, this time dialing the number for the utility company. Her fingers trembled as the phone rang. The automated voice greeted her, and she pressed the necessary buttons to speak with an operator. She had done this many times before, called in to request extensions or ask for payment plans. But this time, there was no easy solution, no simple extension. "Thank you for calling," the operator said after what felt like an eternity on hold. "How can I assist you today?" I need to discuss a payment plan for my bill," Linda said, her voice tight. "I'm behind, and I need more time." The operator's response was efficient, almost robotic. "We can offer you a payment extension, but there will be a late fee added to your balance. The extension will only give you an additional week." Linda felt her stomach tighten. A week? That wouldn't be enough. The reality of her financial strain was hitting her all at once. She wasn't just behind on utilities. Her car insurance was due in 2 days, and she wasn't sure how she would cover it either. How had she gone from being financially secure to this? "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll make the payment as soon as I can." The call ended, and Linda sat in silence for a moment. The weight of it all pressed down on her. The uncertainty of when she would receive her retirement benefits was bad enough, but now the rising cost of living was making her feel like she was sinking under the pressure. Even simple expenses, things she had once taken for granted, were now a challenge. Linda walked over to the window and looked out at the street below. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful even, but inside, she felt like everything was falling apart. She had worked so hard for so long to be financially independent, but now, it felt like all that hard work had been in vain. The security she had always counted on, the financial stability she had so carefully planned for, seemed like it was slipping through her fingers. It wasn't just the money. It was the deepening sense of powerlessness that came with it. Linda had always been the one to handle her own affairs, never asking for help unless it was absolutely necessary. But now, she was unsure how much longer she could keep going on her own. The thought of reaching out to her family for financial assistance made her stomach churn. She had never wanted to burden them, but the reality of her situation was becoming undeniable. Linda had spent years building a life based on her ability to handle things alone. But now, it seemed that her hard-earned independence was no longer enough to protect her. She had reached a point where even the most basic tasks, like paying bills, managing her health, and planning for the future, felt like monumental challenges. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the full weight of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. The looming uncertainty of when, or if, she would receive her pension was just the tip of the iceberg. Her savings were dwindling, and her financial options were running out. Linda had always thought retirement would be a time of peace, a time to relax after decades of hard work. But now, the future was uncertain, and the comfort she had once expected seemed like a distant dream. Linda woke up to the sound of her alarm clock ringing, signaling the start of another day filled with uncertainty. She had been dreading getting out of bed for the past few weeks. The weight of her financial and emotional struggles seemed to press down on her the moment her eyes opened. It was as though she could feel the bills piling up on top of her, each one heavier than the last. She reached for her phone to check her email, hoping for some sort of update from the Social Security Administration, but the familiar sight of more unanswered requests and delay notices only made her sigh in defeat. The physical exhaustion she felt each morning was now compounded by the mental exhaustion. Linda hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. She found herself tossing and turning, unable to shut off her racing thoughts. How would she make ends meet? How long would it take before she was able to access the benefits she had worked for her entire life? Her mind was constantly running in circles, trying to calculate how long she could stretch her limited funds, wondering if there was a way to make it through another month. She glanced at the clock. It was already past 10 a.m., but she had yet to get out of bed. The entire morning had been spent staring at the ceiling, hoping for a sign of relief that never came. The thought of calling SSA again, going through another round of verification, made her stomach churn. But what choice did she have? The bills kept coming, and her pension was still tied up in an endless loop of bureaucracy. Linda dragged herself out of bed and into the kitchen, hoping that the simple act of preparing breakfast would help clear her head. But as she looked at the stove, she was reminded of the looming gas bill that was due next week. She had barely been able to pay it the last time, and this month, there was no money left to cover it. Her eyes scanned the room. Her modest apartment, the place she had always considered her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. As she made her way to the kitchen table, Linda picked up a letter from her credit card company, the envelope thick with a sense of urgency. She opened it, hoping for some good news, but instead was met with the same notice she had been receiving for weeks, past due. The reality of her financial strain hit her like a wave, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. It was becoming harder to ignore the growing fear that soon, she wouldn't be able to keep up with even the most basic expenses. Tom, her longtime friend from her accounting days, had suggested that she might be eligible for a community assistance program, but Linda had always been proud. Asking for charity had never been something she thought she would need. She had always handled things on her own, and the idea of reaching out for help made her feel like a failure, but the reality was becoming clearer. She couldn't keep up this facade of control any longer. Her pride was a barrier she no longer had the energy to maintain. Sitting down at the kitchen table, Linda's mind wandered back to her conversation with her son, Kyle, the week before. He had called, worried about her. Kyle, now living on the other side of the country, had been trying to convince her to move in with him and his family. He offered to help, but Linda had turned him down. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to lose the independence she had worked so hard for, even if it meant suffering in silence, but as she sat there now, the reality of her situation became undeniable. She couldn't ignore the mounting pressure, the growing pile of bills, and the fear that she was heading toward financial ruin. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was an email from the Social Security Administration, and Linda's heart skipped a beat. This could be it, the moment she'd been waiting for. She clicked it open eagerly, hoping for some good news, but the message was the same as all the others: "We are currently reviewing your request." "Thank you for your patience." Her frustration boiled over. She slammed her phone down on the table, the sound echoing in the quiet apartment. She had followed every instruction, submitted every required document, and still, she was stuck waiting. The system was failing her, and with each passing day, her faith in it eroded further. How long could she wait? How long before she would have to make difficult decisions about her future? Linda leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, trying to calm the growing panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She wasn't one to let emotions control her, but it was hard not to feel like everything she had worked for was slipping away. The silence in the room was deafening, and Linda couldn't help but feel as though she was drowning in it. She had always been able to keep things together, to manage her life with a sense of control. But now, it felt like the more she fought, the more the ground shifted beneath her feet. The question lingered in her mind: was it time to ask for help? The thought terrified her. She had built her entire life on the idea of self-reliance, but the reality was different now. She needed to face the truth: she couldn't do this alone anymore. But how could she reach out for help when it felt like asking for assistance was admitting defeat? Linda's internal struggle mirrored the chaotic mess of paperwork, forms, and unanswered questions. The battle was no longer just about navigating a bureaucratic system, it was about fighting her own pride, her fear of losing her independence, and accepting that she couldn't carry the burden alone. Linda woke up with a start, the sunlight pouring into her bedroom window far too bright for her mood. She had been tossing and turning all night, restless with the weight of her worries. For the past few weeks, the same anxious thoughts had been circling her mind, never allowing her a moment of peace. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw a pile of unpaid bills, looming like mountains she was supposed to climb but felt too small to face. It had been nearly 2 months since she first attempted to update her banking information with the Social Security Administration, and yet, she still hadn't received a single confirmation that her request had been processed. She had gone through the grueling steps of verification multiple times, each attempt more frustrating than the last. And every time she felt like she was one step closer to resolution, something else would delay the process. Her retirement benefits, the very thing she had worked for and relied upon, had become a cruel joke. The financial strain was relentless. The gas bill was due in 2 days, and her credit card company had started sending warning notices about her overdue balance. She could feel the pressure building, squeezing her chest with every passing hour. Linda had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, but now, it seemed like the world was closing in on her, with every resource she had used to manage her life slipping through her fingers. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. The darkness of the room didn't comfort her anymore. She reached for her phone, scrolling through the emails from SSA, looking for any sign of hope, but all she found were more automated responses telling her to wait. She felt like she was staring at the same words, over and over again, as though the system was playing a game with her. "Please be patient, your request is still under review," she read aloud, her voice thick with frustration. The words stung, reminding her that, despite all her efforts, there was no certainty in sight. The future she had so carefully planned for, the life she had imagined after retirement, was now a haze of financial instability and a slow, suffocating feeling of helplessness. Linda had tried to keep it together, to remain positive, but the cracks were starting to show. She had called her daughter, Megan, a few days ago, and despite trying to sound upbeat, Linda knew Megan could hear the strain in her voice. Megan had insisted that she come to visit, to talk things over, but Linda had refused. She didn't want to burden her daughter with her problems, didn't want to appear weak or incapable. Megan had her own family to look after, and Linda was determined not to be a burden. But now, with the bills piling up and her health issues becoming more persistent, Linda was beginning to realize that her pride, her refusal to ask for help, was starting to break her down. She had always believed that she could handle everything on her own, but the truth was that the weight of her financial and emotional struggles was becoming too much to carry. The thought of asking for help, really asking for help, not just a few dollars or a loan, but truly relying on someone else, felt impossible. She had always been the one who gave, who took care of others. She had raised Megan on her own after her divorce, always managing to keep her head above water. But now, as she stared at the growing stack of unpaid bills, she realized that she was drowning, and there was no lifeline in sight. As Linda sat there, lost in her thoughts, her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her back to reality. It was a call from Megan. Linda hesitated, then picked it up. "Hi, Mom," Megan's voice came through, warm and concerned. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. How are you doing?" Linda opened her mouth to answer, but the words caught in her throat. She had wanted to say that everything was fine, that she had everything under control, but she couldn't bring herself to lie. The truth was that she was struggling, and the facade she had been holding up was starting to crack. I'm okay," Linda finally said, but even to her own ears, the words didn't sound convincing. Megan didn't buy it. "Mom, you're not okay. I can hear it in your voice. What's really going on?" Linda let out a long breath. She could feel the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. "Megan, I don't know what to do anymore. I've been waiting for my pension to come through, and the Social Security Administration keeps delaying everything. My bills are piling up, and I'm struggling to make ends meet. I feel like I'm just waiting for everything to fall apart." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Linda could almost hear Megan thinking. Then, softly, Megan said, "Mom, you don't have to do this alone. I know you don't want to ask for help, but I'm here. You don't have to carry this by yourself." Linda closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. It wasn't that she didn't know Megan would help. It was the fact that asking for help felt like giving up, like admitting that she couldn't handle things on her own. But as Megan continued to reassure her, Linda realized that maybe it wasn't about giving up. Maybe it was about finding a way through this together. "I'll be okay," Linda said, her voice soft. "I just need some time to figure it out." But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. She didn't have all the answers. And time was running out. She could no longer ignore the fact that she needed help. The question was, could she accept it? The days following Linda's conversation with Megan felt different. There was a shift, a subtle change in her outlook that she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. Megan had offered to help, and though Linda hadn't yet come to terms with accepting that help, the mere fact that someone had reached out made the world feel a little less heavy. It wasn't a solution, not yet, but it was a step forward. Linda found herself waking up each morning with a faint hope that maybe today would bring some answers. The pile of unpaid bills still sat on her kitchen counter, and the uncertainty of her pension situation loomed over her, but something had changed inside her. The cracks in her resolve had started to show, and though they frightened her, they also left room for something new, a chance to rebuild, to stop pretending she could handle it all alone. One morning, Megan called again, this time to follow up on their previous conversation. Linda hadn't been able to shake the feeling that she was still in a holding pattern, stuck waiting for something she had no control over. But this time, there was a plan. "Mom, I've been looking into some local programs that could help with your bills," Megan said, her voice full of optimism. "There are a few community resources that offer financial aid for seniors who are struggling. I've found some that could help with your rent and utilities. And even some that might help cover medical expenses." Linda sat up straighter, her heart picking up speed. "What kind of programs?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Megan explained the details, laying out a few options that Linda could explore. It was nothing life-changing, but it was a start, something tangible to grasp onto. It felt like the first real glimmer of hope in weeks, and Linda couldn't help but feel a spark of relief. But what about the Social Security Administration? Linda asked, her voice tinged with frustration. I've been waiting forever. Why is it taking so long to get my benefits updated? Megan sighed. I know, Mom, I know. But we'll figure it out. I've also been in touch with a lawyer who specializes in Social Security cases. I think we should meet with him next week. He may be able to expedite your request or at least give us some advice on how to push the SSA to move faster. The thought of involving a lawyer gave Linda pause. It felt like a last resort, a step she had never imagined she would take. But at the same time, it felt like the only option left. Her trust in the system had eroded over the past few months, and now it seemed that the only way forward was to fight back, through the legal channels, if necessary. Okay, Linda said, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. Let's do it. If it gets things moving faster, then we have to give it a try. The call ended with Megan promising to set up an appointment with the lawyer and continue researching other assistance programs. As Linda hung up, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and hopefulness. The days ahead would still be difficult, but at least there was a plan now. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. Her daughter was in this with her, and the thought brought her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. That afternoon, Linda walked to the mailbox, the warm sun on her face. As she opened the box, she found a letter from the SSA. It was another one of those impersonal, automated notices, but this one was different. It had an official stamp and the words "urgent response required" printed across the top. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? The letter she had been waiting for. She ripped it open, her fingers trembling slightly, and read the contents. We are pleased to inform you that your banking information update has been processed and is now under review, it began. Your request for a cost of living adjustment will be processed shortly. Linda's eyes widened. It wasn't the final confirmation she had hoped for, but it was progress. Finally, after months of waiting, there was a glimmer of movement. It wasn't the full resolution she had been praying for, but it was something, an acknowledgement that the wheels were turning. She stood in the driveway for a long moment, staring at the letter in her hand, feeling the weight lift from her chest. It wasn't the end of her struggle, but it was the first sign that things were moving forward. Linda felt a small tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't from frustration this time. It was relief, a release of the tension she had been holding for so long. She didn't know what the next few weeks would bring, but for the first time in months, Linda had hope. She had a plan, and with Megan by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could weather this storm. Linda sat at her kitchen table, the morning sunlight filtering through the window and casting a warm glow on the pile of paperwork in front of her. The bills, the letters from the Social Security Administration, and the reminder about her upcoming rent payment, all of it was overwhelming, but today felt different. For the first time in a while, she could see a way forward. The lawyer Megan had recommended had been professional and reassuring. Linda had met with him a week ago, and his approach had given her a renewed sense of control. He had reviewed her case, outlined her options, and even promised to help expedite her Social Security request. The feeling of having an advocate in her corner was something Linda hadn't realized she needed so desperately. Megan had been just as supportive, checking in regularly and offering to help with the logistics. Linda's daughter had been a constant source of strength, but Linda knew that asking for help, really leaning on someone, had been harder for her than she'd ever imagined. But now, as she sat there in her kitchen, she realized that accepting help wasn't a failure. It was simply a step in a new direction, a way to reclaim her peace of mind. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was Megan. Hey, Mom, Megan said cheerfully, her voice as bright as always. I just wanted to check in and see how things are going. Have you heard back from the SSA yet? Linda felt a surge of gratitude. Megan had been her lifeline through this whole process, and now, she wasn't just a daughter, she was Linda's partner in this fight. Actually, yes, Linda replied, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I got an email this morning. They've processed my banking information, and it looks like my pension is moving forward. It's not fully resolved yet, but there's progress. Megan's voice sounded almost too good to be true. That's amazing, Mom. I knew you'd get there. It's so good to hear. Linda leaned back in her chair, letting the relief wash over her. It wasn't the final resolution, but it was the light at the end of the tunnel. After months of frustration, the wheels were finally turning, and that was enough to keep her going. I'm not out of the woods yet, though, Linda continued. But at least I know things are moving in the right direction now. And with the lawyer's help, I feel like I'm in control again. That's all I've wanted for you, Mom, Megan said, her voice softening. You've always been so strong and independent. It's just hard seeing you go through all this. I'm so proud of you for hanging in there. Linda felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much the support meant to her until that moment. Megan's words hit harder than she expected, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this after all. They had a team now, Linda, Megan, the lawyer, and even the people at the local community programs who had started offering assistance. Together, they had started to build a safety net that Linda hadn't had before. And for the first time in months, she felt the hope that had been missing from her life. The phone call ended with promises to check in again soon, and as Linda set the phone down, she felt a sense of calm that she hadn't experienced in what seemed like forever. The pressure, though still there, had lightened. There was a plan in motion, and the uncertainty that had loomed over her like a storm cloud was beginning to break. As she sat there, looking out at the world beyond her window, Linda realized that she had made it through the hardest part. The journey wasn't over, but she was no longer fighting alone. She had taken the first step toward accepting help, and that decision had made all the difference. She had choices now. She could wait for the final confirmation from SSA, and in the meantime, she could focus on what came next. She could work with the lawyer to get her benefits moving faster. She could apply for more community assistance if necessary. Linda had options, and that knowledge was enough to fill her with determination. The future was still uncertain. The financial strain wasn't magically gone, and she still had a long road ahead of her. But as she looked out at the sun rising over the neighborhood, Linda felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that things would be okay.